Hello and good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, February 14th. Bill C-4 was the focus of our attention this week. We'll have a brief update here with links in the show notes and a special edition to come. On top of that, policing is under increased privacy and information scrutiny, as a sweeping corruption scandal in Toronto has led to charges against 8 current and former officers and triggered a province-wide systems review across Ontario. We're tracking renewed calls to bring the Prime Minister's office under access to information law, a major Supreme Court ruling reshaping solicitor-client privilege, and a look at more updates on the ongoing crisis in Nova Scotia following last year's cyberattack on the province's power utility. In the United States, lawmakers are battling over classified complaints, election rules, surveillance programs, and the fallout from the Epstein files, while new disclosures reveal the IRS mistakenly shared taxpayer data with Homeland Security. And we close with the extraordinary personal impact of U.S. sanctions on a Canadian judge serving at the International Criminal Court. Let's dive in. At the time of recording, Bill C-4 remains before a Senate committee. FIPA made one of many presentations and submissions chastising Parliament's actions and recognizing the bill serves only political parties and not the public. Despite uniform condemnation from civil society and regulators raising significant concern in the Senate, the self-interest of the members of Parliament and the power of the political parties they represent may triumph over the rights of people to control their personal information. There's a lot happening on this file, and FIPA's going to run a special edition in an effort to bring you up to date. Check out our show notes below. We'll bring you more in the days ahead. And while FIPA was at Senate committee this week, so were our allies. On February 10th, our friends at the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group testified at the Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology on Bill C-12, the Strengthening Canada's Immigration System and Borders Act. ICLMG warned the bill risks expanding rights-violating powers in 2 key areas. First, Part 7, which would give Cabinet broad authority to suspend or cancel immigration documents on vague, public interest grounds, powers they say are ripe for abuse. And second, Part 5, which would expand government information sharing in ways that could expose sensitive personal data, chill access to services, and become difficult to control once shared, especially across jurisdictions. We'll link to ICLMG's remarks and briefs in the show notes. The access and privacy spotlight turned sharply toward Canadian policing this week, triggered by a corruption scandal inside the Toronto Police Service. 7 current officers and 1 retired officer have been charged following a York Regional Police investigation alleging bribery, drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and, critically, the leaking of confidential police database information to organized crime networks. Investigators allege that officers accessed personal information and provided it to criminal actors who then carried out shootings, extortions, and robberies. The allegations have not been tested in court. York Police Deputy Chief Ryan Hogan said the probe began last June after a vehicle rammed a marked York police cruiser parked at the home of a corrections facility officer in what investigators allege was a conspiracy to commit murder involving 2 youth suspects and an adult. Toronto's police chief called the case painful and unsettling, but the broader issue is systemic. When internal databases meant to protect the public are allegedly used to facilitate crime, public trust erodes quickly. The chief added he will be seeking to suspend 6 of the accused officers without pay, in accordance with policing legislation. The investigation into misconduct allegations arising from the criminal probe will be taken over by the Law Enforcement Complaints Agency. In response, Ontario's Policing Inspector General has launched a province-wide inspection, examining supervision, recruitment screening, database access controls, evidence management, and substance use oversight across all 44 municipal forces, the OPP, and the Anishinaabe Aski Police Service. Opposition to the investigation comes from the Toronto Police Association. It is concerned about the scope of the province-wide inspection, claiming, quote, "It is overly broad, as these allegations are limited to an extremely small number of individuals and not a reflection of the broader membership." End quote. In a separate instance in Regina, a former police sergeant has been sentenced after pleading guilty to using internal police databases over 8 years to contact and deceive 33 women. He received a conditional sentence of 2 years less a day to be served in the community, followed by 3 years probation. Some victims have expressed displeasure in the ruling, with one saying she had hoped for a tougher penalty. Regina's police chief says new audit measures and database access controls are now being implemented, including requiring officers to document why they access sensitive systems. Police began addressing oversight issues after a different officer was found to be using the database for personal reasons. The officer was penalized for 1 day without pay and required to retake privacy training. Across provinces, the common thread is clear. Access to powerful information systems demands equally powerful oversight. It's a message political parties aren't hearing. Turning to federal transparency. Information Commissioner Carolyn Maynard is again calling for the Prime Minister's office and ministers' offices to be brought under the Access to Information Act. Appearing before MPs this week, she described access to information as a quasi-constitutional right, and Canadians should be able to request records from the highest political offices, not just departments. Despite decades of review, the act has changed little since 1983 and is widely seen as outdated and unevenly administered. The House's Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics is embarking on its latest study of the much criticized system. Maynard is also pushing for tighter timelines, limits on exemptions, and a public interest override. A draft discussion paper prepared for the Treasury Board review expressed reservations about the Information Commissioner's steady increase in the use of her powers to issue legally binding orders to departments. Meanwhile, in the Northwest Territories, LJ reporter Claire McFarlane at Cabin Radio reports that MLA Kieran Testart is calling for a child and youth advocate to provide independent oversight of the territory's child welfare system. On the other hand, the Dene Nation said it was exploring the option to exercise greater jurisdiction over child and family services. Dene National Chief George McKenzie told Cabin Radio the way child welfare services are currently managed is not working for Indigenous communities in the Northwest Territories. Testart says privacy rules often prevent families and even MLAs from accessing meaningful information. The territory's health minister says reforms are underway, but the debate highlights how privacy protections can sometimes collide with accountability. And in Brampton, LJ reporter Mohammed Hamza at The Pointer details concerns over Mayor Patrick Brown's newly approved budget. Property taxes will rise 4.36%, nearly double inflation, while critics question reliance on reserve funds, unexplained funding categories labeled Other, and more than $1.2 billion in previously collected capital funds that remain unspent. Throughout the 2026 budget process, Brown and many of his council allies have misleadingly claimed that Brampton taxpayers will see no increase to their property bill this year. Brown's initial proposed budget, which he brought forward under the strong mayor system, initially called for a 1.5% increase to the city's share of the property tax bill, despite Brampton's budget shrinking by 1.4% this year. Freedom of information requests have revealed extensive overseas travel spending and other controversial expenditures, raising familiar transparency questions about municipal fiscal oversight. In Nova Scotia, the fallout from last year's cyberattack on Nova Scotia Power continues to widen. The March 2025 breach exposed the personal data of 280,000 customers, disrupting billing systems for nearly a year, and forced widespread use of estimated bills, some reportedly 3 or 4 times higher than normal. The Nova Scotia Energy Board will now conduct 2 separate inquiries, one examining cybersecurity failures and system recovery, and another reviewing data storage practices, billing estimates, and fraud protections. The Federal Privacy Commissioner is also investigating. The utility has hired 100 meter readers and says full system restoration should occur by March, a year after the attack occurred. Meanwhile, it is seeking an 8% rate increase over 2 years, drawing opposition from Premier Tim Houston and all major provincial parties. A proposed class action lawsuit alleges government failures and inaccurate billing. Utility officials said that the system estimates bills based on what they say are warm months and cold months. November, marking the beginning of the cold months, meant a spike in projected bills. Following the scrutiny, the utility company has named a new chief executive, Vivek Su, a Nova Scotia Power board member. The current CEO will leave his post on March 1st to become vice president of strategy and policy with the utility's parent company, Emera Inc. Staying with the courts, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that solicitor-client privilege, though near absolute, may yield in rare circumstances when a lawyer must access privileged communications to defend themselves in a criminal case. In a 7-2 decision, the court affirmed that an innocence at stake exception can apply, while also condemning serious charter breaches in an underlying wiretap case. The decision came in the case of a Regina criminal defense lawyer, whose phone conversation with a client was recorded under a wiretap authorization in an RCMP investigation into cocaine trafficking. The surveillance authorization included a requirement that anyone monitoring an intercepted conversation should discontinue the interception if they reasonably believed a lawyer was on the call. The ruling reinforced how fundamental privacy protections operate and where their limits lie. Meanwhile, in British Columbia, LGI reporter Michelle Gamage at the Tyee details the case of a man battling cancer while facing deportation and lacking provincial health coverage. After cancer ate through the skin and bone of Francisco Barajona's arm, Surrey Memorial Hospital refused to treat him unless he paid his previous unpaid bills. Barahona has lived in Canada for 15 years but has not yet found a way to get immigration status that would grant him lasting healthcare coverage. When he was healthy, he could get temporary medical services plan or MSP coverage under a work permit, but once he got sick, he could no longer work. The case raises profound questions about data sharing between hospitals and immigration authorities, the limits of MSP eligibility, and whether privacy protections are being upheld when vulnerable individuals seek care. In Alberta, the city of Cold Lake has adopted a new AI policy governing municipal staff use of artificial intelligence tools. Christy Issert, the city of Cold Lake's general manager of corporate services, told council the policy was developed in response to the rapid expansion of AI across common workplace platforms. The policy emphasizes protection of personal information and explicitly prohibits generating images of people using AI systems. Issert said the policy aims to avoid restrictions on specific technologies or applications. Instead, the policy is designed to provide a guiding framework that requires staff to consider key principles before using AI in the workplace. Council unanimously made a motion to approve the policy. As municipalities confront embedded AI features in everyday software, governance frameworks are quickly becoming essential. Finally, Manitoba has launched a study into grocery pricing, including whether personalized pricing based on consumer data is occurring. The finance minister couldn't point to an example in Manitoba, but cited a recent report by Consumer Reports and 2 advocacy groups in the United States. It said some online shoppers using a third-party platform were charged different prices for the same item bought at the same time. While there's little evidence of the practice in Canada, the study reflects growing concern about how personal information may influence pricing in opaque ways. The government study is also considering whether to expand the province's control over the retail price of milk. The province already sets a maximum retail price for 1-liter cartons and could move to also limit the price of 2 and 4-liter formats. Now to the United States. A Tennessee appeals court has ruled that the writings of a 2023 Nashville school shooter can be released under the state's public records law, overturning a lower court decision that kept them sealed. The ruling is part of a years-long dispute over public records surrounding the 2023 shooting. The shooter left behind documents that include journals, a suicide note, and a memoir, according to court filings. A group of parents has been fighting to keep them from being released out of fear that the writings will further traumatize their children and could inspire copycat attacks. In Washington, controversy continues around a classified complaint involving Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard's handling of classified material with members of Congress. It is known an anonymous author of a complaint works for a U.S. intelligence agency, and in May filed a report claiming that Gabbard withheld classified information for political reasons. Republican Intelligence Committee leaders have rejected the complaint as non-credible, while Democrats question why it took 8 months to reach Congress, with some Democrats claiming it to be an attempt to bury a whistleblower complaint. The attorney for the person who made the complaint has said that while he cannot discuss the details of the report or the identity of its author, there is no justification for keeping it from Congress since last spring. At the same time, the Justice Department is allowing lawmakers to review more than 3 million unredacted Epstein-related files, though errors in earlier releases exposed victims' personal information, drawing sharp criticism. To access the files, lawmakers will need to give the Justice Department 24 hours notice. They will be able to review the files on computers at the Department of Justice. Only lawmakers, not their staff, will have access to the files, and they will be permitted to take notes but not make electronic copies. Elsewhere, a New Mexico trial against Meta is underway, alleging the company failed to protect children from sexual exploitation and misrepresented the risks of its platforms. A state prosecutor said Meta has failed to disclose what it knows about the harmful effect of its platforms on children, in violation of New Mexico's consumer protection laws. More than 40 state attorneys general have filed lawsuits against Meta, claiming it is deliberately designing features that addict children to its platforms and fails to protect children and their mental health. Most filed their lawsuits in federal court. Meanwhile, more than 24 privacy advocates in California are calling for removal of covert Border Patrol license plate readers hidden in traffic equipment, warning of predictive surveillance programs scanning millions of drivers. The groups believe the cameras feed data into a controversial U.S. Border Patrol predictive domestic intelligence program that scans the country's roadways for suspicious travel patterns. An Associated Press investigation published in November revealed that the U.S. Border Patrol, an agency under U.S. Customs and Border Protection, had hidden license plate readers in ordinary traffic safety equipment. And in a significant disclosure, a court filing reveals the IRS mistakenly shared the taxpayer data of thousands of individuals with Homeland Security under an immigration data sharing agreement, raising concerns about unlawful disclosure of confidential records. The revelation stems from a data sharing agreement signed last April by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, which allows U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to submit names and addresses of immigrants inside the U.S. illegally to the IRS for cross-verification against tax records. A declaration filed by IRS Chief Risk and Control Officer Dottie Romo stated that the IRS was only able to verify roughly 47,000 of the 1.8 million names ICE requested. Finally, House Republicans have passed legislation requiring strict proof of citizenship documentation for voter registration ahead of midterms, a measure critics warn could disenfranchise millions. The bill, called the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility or Save America Act, would require Americans to prove they are citizens when they register to vote, mostly through a valid U.S. passport or birth certificate. It would also require a valid photo identification before voters can cast ballots, which some states already demand. Across multiple fronts, surveillance, data access, and institutional accountability remain central political battlegrounds. We close with the personal impact of U.S. sanctions on a Canadian judge. Kimberly Prost, a Winnipeg-born judge at the International Criminal Court, has been sanctioned by the Trump administration over cases involving American personnel. U.S. President Donald Trump targeted the ICC with sanctions last February, claiming cases before the court involving Americans and Israelis have sought to undermine U.S. national security, an argument the court firmly rejects. As a result, her credit cards stopped working, online services disappeared, Hotel reservations became complicated. Even ebooks vanished from her devices. Though American sanctions aren't binding in Canada, global financial systems often comply to avoid risk. Prost said banks in Canada, the UK, and the Netherlands maintained all her accounts. She says the sanctions create daily disruptions, but she remains committed to upholding international law. Internal messages obtained through access to information requests show Canadian officials describing the sanctions as awful, even as Ottawa navigates diplomatic pressures. For one Canadian jurist, geopolitics has become deeply personal. Advocates for international law have accused the Carney government of avoiding direct criticism of Trump in order to keep trade negotiations on track. As always, we hope today's stories helped you stay informed about the forces shaping privacy, transparency, and accountability. At the time of recording, Bill C-4 remains before Senate committee, so be sure to tune in for our special Bill C-4 coverage. You can find initial details in this week's show notes and more in the days ahead. To support this work, please subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring or consider making a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and stay informed.